I thought the humiliation ended when my father died. His final will demanded I take a DNA test just to prove once again that I was never really part of his real family. I braced for the shame, but the results cut the room open in a way none of us expected. The golden child sister he worshipped, not his at all. 34 years of my mother's carefully guarded secret unraveled in a single page: a French surgeon, a hidden affair, a stolen legacy. And as the lawyer scrambled and my sister's smile shattered, I realized the real war was only beginning. The night of the will reading still plays in my head like a movie I never asked to star in. We weren't gathered in some grand mahogany office like you'd expect in those legal dramas. It was just a cramped law office, downtown beige walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of stale coffee in the air. My father had been buried a week earlier, and yet even in death, he managed to script one last show. I sat near the end of the conference table, quiet, trying to keep my breathing steady. The polished surface reflected the stack of folders in front of the attorney. Around me, the family settled in like it was another performance of the same play we'd been acting out for decades. My half-sister Madison glowed as if the spotlight was still fixed on her even in this sterile room. She wore a crisp blazer, her hair in perfect waves, as though she were attending an awards ceremony instead of a legal proceeding. My mother hovered close to her, doting, whispering now and then, like they shared an inside joke. I could already feel the difference in the air. People leaned toward Madison, asking about her job, her fiancé, her future. When their eyes drifted to me, it was polite, almost cautious, like they weren't sure what to say. I'd grown used to it being the shadow in the room, the afterthought. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. The shuffle of papers stopped the small talk. As outlined in Mr. Jensen's instructions, there is a provision we need to address before proceeding further. He glanced at me, then at Madison and back to me. My stomach tightened. The will demanded a DNA test. For me. A few gasps escaped around the table. My aunt dropped her pen and my cousin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I felt every pair of eyes land on me, heavy and probing, as if they had all secretly suspected this moment would come. My father had made sure humiliation would be part of his legacy for me. Even from the grave, he wanted to underline that I wasn't truly his, that I was the expendable one. Madison smirked just barely and tilted her chin, like the result was already written. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line, but she didn't say a word. Not in my defense. Not in protest. Just silence. I wanted to speak, to push back, to ask why this mattered now, but the words lodged in my throat. I thought about all the times he had looked at me across a dinner table with that same dismissive smirk, all the jokes at my expense, all the ways he had minimized me in front of family and strangers alike. This was just the final act. So I nodded. Fine. If he wanted proof, I'd give him proof. The test itself was nothing dramatic. A swab, a form, a sterile envelope. But the weight it carried into that room was crushing. Days passed like wet cement, each hour thick and dragging. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, but every time my phone buzzed, my chest seized, wondering if it was the call. When the results finally came in, the lawyer asked us all back. The same room, the same buzzing lights, the same stack of folders. I walked in with my shoulders squared, but my stomach churned. Madison looked radiant, almost triumphant, like she was about to watch me crumble. My mother avoided my eyes completely. The lawyer opened the envelope, adjusted his glasses, and read. I braced for the shame, but instead the words hit the room like a grenade. The test proved I was his daughter. The golden child wasn't. For a second, the whole world seemed to pause. Madison's perfect smile froze, then cracked. My mother's face drained of color, her hand gripping the edge of the table like it might hold her upright. A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the room, cousins and uncles shifting, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. I sat still, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I just let the silence do the work. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a secret buried for 34 years, a French surgeon, a hidden affair, a legacy built on lies that were about to unravel in front of everyone. The humiliation my father planned for me had just turned into a weapon against the family he'd always preferred, and I wasn't sure any of us were ready for what came next. The hours after the DNA bombshell felt like walking through thick smoke. Everyone was in the room, but no one wanted to speak first. Madison kept staring at the lawyer as if he'd misread, as if one more glance at the paperwork would flip the results back in her favor. My mother sat stiff as a mannequin, her knuckles pale against the wood table. I didn't break the silence. I'd been trained in silence my whole life. When I was a kid, the golden rules of our household weren't written on paper, but they were enforced with precision. Madison got the spotlight and I got the leftovers. At birthdays, she'd get the cake with her name, scripted in perfect icing, while mine came out of a grocery box with crooked letters. At school events, my father made sure to sit front and center for her performances, flowers in hand, while my science fair ribbons were tacked to the fridge for a week before disappearing into a drawer. I remember one barbecue in Dallas. I must have been 15, already old enough to feel the sting of being invisible. Relatives gathered in the backyard, the smell of charcoal and brisket hanging in the humid air. My uncle slapped my father on the back and said, "You must be proud. Madison's looking at colleges already." My father grinned wide like he'd won some unspoken contest. "She's got her eyes on Duke. She'll be the first real success in this family." Then someone asked about me. My father barely turned his head. "Oh, Claire. She's got some little government admin thing up in Maryland. Paperwork, you know." He said it with a chuckle, the kind people use to close a subject, not open it. I stood there, paper plate in hand, hearing it over the pop of the grill and the clink of beer bottles. He might as well have said I was nothing. That laugh echoed for years. What nobody knew, what I could never say, was that the paperwork was classified intelligence. That every late night and every silence wasn't laziness, but operational security. To the family, I was beige wallpaper. To my unit, I was a trusted analyst turning raw signals into life or death decisions. But I learned early that explaining myself to them was pointless. It was easier to nod, smile politely, and let the joke roll over me. At the will reading, as the whispers swirled, I saw the same old pattern playing out. Cousins leaned in toward Madison, some offering quick, nervous jokes to soften the blow. "Guess you were the surprise, huh?" one of them muttered, but his laugh cracked. Madison didn't answer. She just stared at me like I'd stolen something from her. My Aunt Linda, who'd always been the peacemaker, tried to smooth the tension. "Maybe it's just a mistake," she whispered. "Those tests, you know, sometimes they mix things up." But her eyes flicked toward my mother, searching for an explanation. My mother said nothing. She just pressed her lips together so tightly they turned white. I knew that look. It was the same face she wore when she'd come home late from appointments, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. It was the look of someone guarding a story too heavy to let slip. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, and waited. Years of being overlooked had taught me patience. When you're the forgotten one, you learn to sit still and let other people burn through their nerves. What no one in that room realized was that the humiliation I'd carried my whole life had turned into armor. Every slight, every dismissal, every laugh at my expense had hardened me. My father had thought forcing a DNA test would be the final nail, but he'd only handed me a mirror to reflect the lie he'd built. The tension in that law office bled into the days that followed. Phone calls went unanswered. Family chats blew up with speculation. Someone even dug up an old photo of my mother from her 20s, standing next to a man in a white coat at a medical conference in Boston. "A French surgeon," the caption read. The resemblance was too strong to ignore. At work, I kept my head down, but inside the echoes were loud. I remembered the late nights as a teenager sitting in my room while my father and Madison's laughter carried through the house. I remembered the sting of watching him beam with pride at her Air Force acceptance letter, while I got nothing but a last-minute text at my own commissioning. Each memory layered over the other until the picture was clear. I hadn't been the shadow. I had been the decoy. The hardest part wasn't the revelation itself. It was watching Madison unravel. She'd built her entire identity on being the chosen one, the golden child. Now every compliment, every toast, every "your father must be so proud" carried a question mark. At family dinners, after the will reading, the air felt brittle. Conversations cracked, mid-sentence eyes darted to me and then away. Madison tried to hold her head high, but her smile never reached her eyes. I didn't take joy in it. Not exactly. But I didn't feel sorry for her either. For years, she'd basked in the glow that left me in shadow. She'd joined in the dismissive laughs, the cutting remarks, the subtle digs. She'd been his accomplice as much as his favorite. Now the silence belonged to her. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't the one shrinking under it. I was the one watching, waiting, because I knew the secret was bigger than just the test results. My mother's affair wasn't a footnote, it was a fault line. And the family had only just started to feel the tremors. Most people in that law office saw me as the quiet one with the desk job, the girl who blended into beige walls and filled out forms no one would ever read. That was the story my father had written for me, and everyone else played along because it was easier than asking questions. The truth lived somewhere they'd never see. Langley doesn't look like much from the outside. A dull complex of concrete and glass tucked behind security gates, no sign to announce its weight in the world. But inside, behind the layers of clearance and the checkpoints that strip you of everything but your name, it feels like stepping into another reality. One where silence isn't weakness, it's the foundation of trust. That's where I lived my real life. I still remember the first time I briefed in front of a 3-star general. The room was cold lit by the soft glow of screens instead of sunlight. Red icons pulsed on the digital map of the Middle East, each one marking an enemy position, each one holding the weight of lives. I had rehearsed every line, but my hands were steady, my voice measured. Signal intercepts correlate with the geospatial data, I said, pointing to the blinking marker. The asset is compromised. Their position has been leaked. The silence after was heavy. Not the awkward, judgmental silence of family dinners, but the kind that holds decisions too big to take lightly. General Thomas Carter studied the screen, then studied me. He was a man known for cutting through arrogance like a knife, and I braced for questions that never came. Instead, he gave a single nod. "Make it happen, Major." Those 3 words carved deeper into me than any compliment my father had ever given. In that moment, my voice wasn't background noise, it was command. No one in that room thought I was the practice kid. They thought I was the one with the answers. That's what my family never understood. The quiet they mocked was discipline. The secrecy they dismissed was survival. While they were passing judgment at backyard barbecues, I was authorizing countermeasures that shifted the balance of global security. Of course, none of that could ever be spoken aloud at a family table. So the joke of boring admin job lived on repeated until it became a truth in their eyes. And I let them, because the alternative, telling them who I really was impossible. It would have put more than just my career at risk. Still, the divide wore on me. 2 lives running parallel, never touching. At home, the daughter who disappointed. At work, the officer trusted with lives. The friction between the 2 identities became a constant hum in my chest, a reminder that neither world could ever know the other. And yet I kept one reminder with me at all times, a ring. Dark metal, simple, almost plain to the untrained eye. To anyone else, it looked like jewelry without meaning. But to those who knew, it wasn't decoration. It was a badge of service in a high-threat command, something earned, never given. I wore it the way other people wore wedding bands, a symbol of loyalty but to a mission, not a person. It grounded me in the life that mattered. When I got the invitation to Madison's wedding months before the will and the DNA fallout, I had no intention of making a scene. Honestly, I debated not going at all. But years of operational training kick in, even in personal matters. Sometimes you need to be in the room if only to know the lay of the land. So I booked a ticket to New Orleans, packed a simple dress, and slipped the ring on my finger. I didn't wear the uniform. I didn't need to. The ring was enough. Walking into that ballroom, I could already feel the choreography. Richard at the head table, basking in the glow of friends and colleagues. Madison center stage, radiant, playing the role of heir to his empire of perception. My mother, close by, rehearsed smile fixed tight. The rest of the family scattered in polite clusters, whispering, watching. I chose my seat carefully. Not near the action, not so far I'd be invisible. A corner table with a clean line of sight to the stage. Years in intelligence had taught me the value of positioning. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge is sloppy, emotional. It leaves fingerprints. What I had in mind was something else. Call it procedure. A quiet correction to a public lie. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My father, drunk on attention more than champagne, launched into one of his trademark speeches. His voice boomed across the room as if the walls were built to amplify him. He praised Madison's accomplishments, framed her as the jewel of the family, the legacy he would leave behind. Then came the line. Every great project needs a trial run. I want to thank my practice kid for letting me get it right the second time. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I sat still, face neutral, but inside the plan shifted from optional to inevitable. Because the insult wasn't private anymore. It was public, formal. And that required a response in kind, not shouting, not tears, something sharper. I waited. I lifted my glass slowly, deliberately, the overhead lights catching the dull gleam of the ring. A tiny movement invisible to most, but not to her. Madison's eyes roamed the room, drinking in admiration, until they landed on me. For a fraction of a second, her gaze slid past. Then it snapped back, pulled by something she couldn't ignore. Her smile faltered. Her eyes dropped to my hand. Recognition spread across her face like a shadow creeping under a door. And just like that, the trap was set. Richard had always loved a microphone. Even when he didn't need one, he'd find a way to hold one in his hand like it was part of him. That night in the ballroom, glittering with chandeliers and gold trim, he looked like a man born for the stage. His tie was straight, his smile fixed his glass, raised high. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed the speakers, catching his voice and tossing it across the room like a wave. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the brightest chapter in our family's story. All eyes turned toward Madison. She glowed in sequins, her fingers entwined with her new husband's, her posture, the picture of pride. Guests clapped cameras, flashed champagne, fizzed in flutes along the white linen tables. I stayed still at my corner seat, my hand curled loosely around the stem of my water glass, the ring resting in plain sight. I didn't need to do anything more. Richard cleared his throat for dramatic effect. It's not every day a father gets to raise a glass to his only daughter. He paused, milking the words, and I caught the quick dart of a smile from Madison. And to her brilliant future, Lieutenant Madison Jensen, the first real officer of the next generation. The room erupted in applause. Napkins waved, heels clacked against the floor, a few guests even whistled. Madison laughed, eyes shining, basking in it all. And then the punchline? Of course, Richard continued, every great project needs a trial run. I want to thank my practice kid wherever she's hiding for helping me work out the kinks before I got it right with my only daughter. Laughter rolled through the room, thin, polite, the kind that stings more than outright cruelty. Heads turned toward me, then quickly away. Some eyes were sympathetic, others curious, but none of them lingered long. I kept my face perfectly still. No smile, no frown, just a mask. But I shifted my hand. The glass tilted the ballroom light, catching on the ring. It didn't take long. Madison's eyes swept lazily across the crowd the way brides do when they're basking in their moment. Her gaze slid over me, then jerked back like she'd seen a ghost. Her smile cracked. The air seemed to thicken. I could almost see the gears in her mind, the flash of recognition, the training she'd drilled into her body at the academy, kicking in against her will. The ring wasn't decoration. It was a signal. She knew it. Her eyes darted from my hand to my face, back again. A memory must have surfaced. Briefing slides whispered stories of Major Reed, a name that floated in classified circles with weight she'd never imagined belonged to me. Her bouquet slipped from her grip. White roses scattered across the polished floor with a dull thud that cut through the applause. The room hushed. 100 eyes swiveled first to her, then to where she was staring. At me. Madison's body snapped straight, her chin tucked, her shoulders squared. She saluted sharp, flawless automatic. "Ma'am, my apologies. I didn't see you." Her voice carried, amplified by the microphone still in Richard's hand. The silence after was deafening. Guests shifted in their chairs. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" but no one answered. Richard's smile collapsed. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by irritation. "Madison, put your arm down." "What are you doing?" But she didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on me, arm-rigid respect carved into every line of her posture. Whispers turned into ripples across the room. Heads swung between the bride, saluting, and the woman in the back corner, the practice kid, the forgettable one, now seen in a completely different light. The videographer's camera light glowed red, recording every second. I wondered briefly how long it would take before this footage leaked outside the family, before whispers turned into questions that Richard couldn't control. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I let the weight of the moment press down on the room until it was unbearable. Then slowly, I set my glass down, rose to my feet, and gave Madison a deliberate nod, a superior acknowledging a subordinate. Nothing more, nothing less. Her salute trembled but held. Richard's voice broke. "What is this, Claire? What the hell is happening?" I didn't answer. He wasn't the one I owed anything to. For the first time in my life, his opinion wasn't a factor. His world, the one built on jokes, dismissals, and carefully curated lies, had cracked open. Everyone could see it now. I took a slow breath, felt the burn of every eye in the room, and turned toward the doors. The whispers followed me like a tide. "She's military. Did you know? What does this mean?" No one had answers. Not even Madison, who still stood frozen at attention, bouquet petals scattered around her like the debris of an explosion. I walked with even steps across the ballroom floor. Each click of my heels was louder than the music had been louder than the laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier. I didn't look back, but I knew when I pushed the doors open, Richard's empire of pride was crumbling behind me. And as the cool night air hit my face, I understood that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The doors of the ballroom were heavy oak, polished to a gleam, their handles cool under my fingers. For a moment, I stood there listening to the muffled confusion behind me. The voices were frantic now, piling on top of each other, some hushed, some sharp. A few called my name. I didn't turn back. When I pushed the doors open, the sound shifted instantly. Inside, it had been suffocating the low, panicked buzz of people desperate to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Out here, the hotel corridor stretched long and quiet, lined with patterned carpet and dim sconces. My heels clicked against the floor with steady rhythm echoing off the walls. I breathed in deep. The air tasted different, cooler, freer. For the first time that evening, my chest didn't feel locked in a vice. Behind me, the ballroom doors thudded shut. The sound carried down the corridor like a gavel, sealing off one chapter and opening another. That door would hold all of them inside Richard Madison. The guests who'd laughed at his joke and now didn't know where to look. It wasn't my cage anymore. Still, I knew what I left behind. A room full of cameras, cell phones, gossip ripe to spread faster than champagne could pour. Richard's voice trying to patch holes in the sinking ship of his pride. Madison bouquet petals at her feet still shaking from a salute her body had given before her brain had caught up. I walked toward the elevator, but part of me listened for footsteps. Would anyone follow a cousin, maybe wanting to ask if the rumors were true? An aunt desperate to keep the family secrets sewn up. For a moment, I thought I heard the quick patter of heels, but it stopped short as if whoever it was decided crossing that threshold wasn't worth it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Inside the mirror reflected back a version of me I barely recognized, My face was calm, but my eyes were sharp alive in a way they hadn't been in years. The ring caught the overhead light again, a dull gleam against my skin. That tiny symbol had said more than I ever could. As the elevator descended, I thought of every family dinner I'd sat through in silence, every joke that landed at my expense, every time Richard had turned a milestone of mine into background noise while amplifying Madison's smallest achievement. Tonight, without a single raised voice, the balance had shifted, not through revenge, not through rage, but through presence. The door slid open into the hotel lobby. It was quiet this late, just the soft hum of air conditioning and the faint jazz drifting from the bar. A couple sat at a table near the window, heads bent close in conversation. They didn't look up. Outside, New Orleans night air wrapped around me, thick, humid, tinged with the smell of rain on the pavement. I crossed the driveway, slowly, heels clicking against stone, past a valet who froze for a second, as if he wanted to ask something but thought better of it. His eyes flicked to the ballroom windows, glowing gold from inside, then back to me. He looked like he'd just realized he was watching a different kind of procession, one he couldn't name. I kept walking. Each step away from the hotel felt like shedding weight. Not just the night's humiliation turned on its head, but years of carrying the role of practice kid. Years of letting Richard write the script for how others saw me. Out here with the city humming low and the Mississippi River just blocks away, I realized the script was gone. But that didn't mean the story was finished. The family would talk. They'd dissect the moment until it was unrecognizable. The footage would circulate questions multiplying with every retelling. Some would demand explanations. Others would whisper theories. My mother's silence would grow louder with every passing day. Madison would have to face the uncomfortable truth that her crown was built on sand, and Richard would be left with a legacy he could no longer control. I reached the corner, the street lamp buzzing faintly overhead. The city smelled of damp brick and fried food voices carrying faintly from Bourbon Street in the distance. Life moved on out here. Taxis rolled past, laughter echoed from a rooftop bar, the world oblivious to the small earthquake that had just cracked open one family's foundations. I stopped beneath the streetlight, let the warm glow fall across me, and closed my eyes. For a long moment, I let myself just stand there. No audience, no stage, just me, my heartbeat slowing, my lungs filling. I thought of General Carter, his steady nod in that dark briefing room. "Make it happen, Major." Those words had carried me further than my father's entire lifetime of backhanded comments. In Carter's world, silence was respect. In Richard's silence was weakness. Tonight had proven which world I truly belonged to. I opened my eyes and kept walking. The night swallowed me up, but I knew the ballroom would replay the scene over and over, long after the music stopped and the champagne glasses were cleared. Every guest had seen the hierarchy shift. Every guest had seen Richard's pride collapse under the weight of a single salute. I didn't need to say a word. The silence had spoken for me. And as I disappeared into the New Orleans night, I knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for, not revenge, but release. A year has a way of reshaping the world. The ballroom, the roses, the gasps, they feel like a memory trapped in amber, frozen in that humid New Orleans night. My life since then has been measured in entirely different ways. Promotions, missions, people I'm responsible for. The Pentagon doesn't shimmer like a hotel ballroom. It's all steel concrete and fluorescent light, the hum of secure lines and encrypted screens, instead of jazz and champagne. Yet when I walk the long corridors, name badge clipped to my uniform, I feel a kind of weight Richard never could have imagined. It's not about appearances here. It's about decisions that ripple outward to people who will never know my name, but whose lives depend on the ones I make. On my desk sits a simple nameplate, Lieutenant Colonel Claire Reed. It isn't polished gold. It isn't engraved with flourishes. But it means more than any toast my father ever gave. The promotion ceremony had been small, tucked inside a quiet office overlooking the Washington Monument. No chandeliers, no camera lights. Just the presence of people who mattered: my commanding officer, my peers, the team I lead. When they pinned the silver oak leaf on my collar, there was no fanfare, only a solemn nod, a handshake, the weight of responsibility settling heavier on my shoulders. It wasn't for show, it was for trust. I see that same trust reflected back now when I mentor the younger officers. Just last month, I pinned bars on a newly minted captain. He stood straighter as I adjusted the insignia, his eyes wide with gratitude and nerves. I remembered standing in that same place years ago, hoping someone believed in me. I told him, "Your job isn't to be perfect, it's to be steady when others can't." That's what they'll remember. His shoulders relaxed at those words. That's the legacy I'm building. Not the loud, boastful kind my father thought he could stage manage, but one written quietly into the people I help shape. Most days I don't think of him. Not anymore. His voice doesn't echo in my head the way it used to. But sometimes, in the stillness of my office after everyone's gone home, I remember the look on his face in that ballroom, the shock curdling into rage, then collapsing into something smaller, something defeated. It was the first time he saw me clearly, and by then, it was too late. The past doesn't haunt me the way it haunts others in my family. I know because of the email. It arrived on a Thursday morning. Nothing dramatic, just a new message blinking in my secure inbox. The sender's name made my chest tighten for a second, First Lieutenant Madison Jensen. Her subject line was plain request for counsel. The body of the email was formal, almost stiff. She apologized first, profusely sincerely, for our father's conduct that night, for her part in laughing at the role he had written for me. Then she asked if she might have 15 minutes of my time in the coming weeks, not as sisters, not as rivals, but officer to officer. Reading those words, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not revenge. Something closer to sadness edged with relief. She was reaching out from a new place stripped of the pedestal, finally seeing me not as the practice kid, but as someone she could learn from. I didn't reply right away. I let the message sit in my inbox, opening it a few times, reading her words over again. Each time I thought about how different it felt to have her come to me, not with pride in her voice, not with our father's smirk behind her, but with humility, with respect. Eventually, I clicked archive. Not delete, not ignore. Archive. A place where things are stored until you decide what to do with them. I'll answer her. On my time, on my terms. Outside my office window, the Washington Monument cut against the pale morning sky. The city moved on below, people rushing to work, tourists snapping photos, traffic crawling along Constitution Avenue. None of them knew about the small email that signaled a shift decades in the making. But I knew. For the first time in my life, peace didn't depend on a nod from my father or approval from my family. It was mine, earned in silence, reinforced every day by the trust of the people who followed my lead. Richard had believed a legacy was something you declared, with a glass raised high, something you forced into being with a microphone and an audience. He was wrong. A true legacy doesn't need applause. It's written in the quiet choices, the earned respect, the salute that comes unprompted. And I carry that with me every day, whether or not anyone is watching. When I think back now, I realize my father's stage was always temporary. The chandeliers dim, the applause fades, the cameras shut off. But the choices you make in silence, those are the ones that last. That night in New Orleans, I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I didn't demand recognition. I simply stood in my truth, and it was enough to change everything. If you've ever been the one left in the shadows, written out of your family's story, you know how heavy that silence can feel. But silence can also be power. It can be patient strategy and the ground you build your own legacy on. I learned the hard way that you don't need their approval to matter. You don't need a toast or a spotlight or a room full of polite laughter. What you need is the courage to stand steady when the truth finally shows itself. That's what I carry now. Not the weight of being a practice kid, but the strength of being the one who no longer needs the stage. And maybe you've lived through something like this too, being dismissed, underestimated, erased. If you have, I want to hear it. Share your story below, because here, your service, Your struggle, your survival, they are seen. They matter. If you stayed with me through this story, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like mine, stories of betrayal and quiet revenge waiting to be told.